the most important component in brain health for the population in general is avoiding refined carbohydrates, which include sugar. And people think, well, I eat whole grain, you know, doesn't that count? Well, most whole grain is refined flour that, we're being duped by the companies. And that's, so as soon as we eat that, it turns to sugar. So having a couple of pieces of toast for breakfast is like adding 6 teaspoons of sugar or whatever to your breakfast. You wouldn't normally do that.
Massive congratulations, Phil. Like, I know you've been through so much to get this paper out with Paul Laursen, who I absolutely love, who I've
Thank
had
you.
on the show as well. And so you published a
Yes.
paper recently in the Frontiers in Public Health Journey, giving the links between refined carbohydrates and excess body fat and reduction in brain health. Now, I know that you've been interested in this topic for decades. I mean, you're the MAF method guy. Like, everyone knows you so well for the MAF method, and I'm a massive fan of it myself, as you know. But you have also at the same time been really putting out information about this topic as well, about refined carbohydrates, body fat, brain health. And I love this kind of sentence that you put on your website, which is basically what the MAF method is about. And you said, look, the point isn't about how fast you're running. The point is to change the way your body gets its energy. You want to burn more fat and less sugar. And I feel like that's like the underpinning of your paper and your beliefs. So, Phil, I guess the first question is like, what made you do this? You've been doing this since the 70s, right? You've been researching this since the 70s, and that's a long time. What brought you to write this paper and to really get stuck into this topic and put all of this information out there?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I'll try to condense the answer because there's a lot of features of that. I mean, this is a research paper. I was a clinician for many years, and during those years as a clinician, my focus was a one-on-one thing with a patient. And I also worked with athletes and did corporate health and that sort of stuff. So I did group things, but it was clinical. My research agenda back then, because I didn't have time to write a research paper. My research involved what they call poster presentations, where you have an idea, you write an abstract, you make some cute images and charts and graphs or whatever, and you send it to a conference, and they have to accept it. And if you're accepted, then you get to put up a big poster. That's why it's called a poster presentation in the hall where all these doctors are at this conference and other healthcare practitioners. And then you may have 15 minutes to present it. And that's sort of cut and dry, pretty simple, not a long time. It could be something as simple as a case history of a patient you worked with. And here's what you found, here's what you did, here's the outcome. Very simple. Um, later, later in my career, when I closed my clinic, literally, I started consulting with individuals one-on-one, but it was mostly working at home and writing more and do. So I had more time to spend on more complicated research issues, questions. And what I like to do is connect the dots. And when you do that, you have to kind of spell out what you're doing to connect the dots and what it means to individuals, what it means to humanity, society, and what this paper really is, I think, is an accumulation of all the things I did over the last many years, where I put everything together, and it's a big picture issue. And was the attempt was to show how how a healthy brain, or first, what is a healthy brain? Because people think if they don't have Alzheimer's or memory loss, they must have a healthy brain. That's not the case. But the idea was to show that a healthy brain influences our lives, the lives of our friends and family and our community, but the whole world and all the problems we have in the world that we're trying to correct. We can't correct them if we don't have enough healthy brains.
That's
And
such a good point.
that's a big,
I never thought about it on such a big scale. You know, if we have a huge worldwide decline in cognitive function, which is the truth, we have a huge worldwide decline in cognitive function. What about the people? Okay, so You've got the small units like families and friends, but then if you zoom out, you have leaders and you have, huge groups of people running this and running that, and it's just, how can the world function if there's a worldwide decline in cognitive function? And I have to say, this topic is really close to my heart as well, because I believe the reason why I got into studying nutrition, I started studying when I was 30 and I'm 40 now, so that's 10 years ago, was because my grandmother, she came down with Alzheimer's and that's how she passed. And it was just the most harrowing thing to watch over a period of years. And I remember getting really concerned for my family. So for my mother, whose mother is my grandmother, and then also for myself, and then for my kids. And I know that the paper you've written, I've read it, it's huge. And it's not just about Alzheimer's, like you said, it's about just cognitive decline. Like my brain is my weak link. So if I'm not healthy, I get brain fog.
Yeah, yeah. And if your
So,
brain is your weak link, nothing is going to work right. And
right, yeah.
but what people don't understand is that most of these conditions, these cognitive conditions, these brain diseases, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, just memory loss, the image that society has of old people, it just, those problems are preventable. Most of those problems are preventable. So that's number
Mm.
one. The reason, well, the brain is such an amazing part of our body. It's such an amazing, it's this little 3.5 pound block of fat, really. It's like almost 70% fat. But the reason it's so incredible, there's a lot of reasons, but one of them is that it repairs itself, it fixes itself. It continually can improve if you feed it. And in fact, our brain should be the best it's ever been on the day we die.
That's really
So
reassuring.
the deterioration, yeah, the deterioration that we see in people is abnormal and preventable. So I'm just saying, hey, let's prevent this. Let's fix it. And it happens to be connected with so many other things that we mentioned earlier, including healthcare and healthcare costs. We can't afford those healthcare costs. People don't understand that at some point, different countries are going to start saying, if they haven't already, they're going to start saying, well, we can't afford to treat people because we've run out of money for healthcare.
I love how you say this is preventable. Um, how widespread is cognitive decline? Do you have the stat in your head?
Yes.
Of course you do. Why did I ask that? Of course you do.
One of the things, you can ask anything. I mean, if I don't know, I'll just make it up. No, only kidding. One of the big aspects of this paper, the big conclusions, is that 80% of the world has poor brain health.
80%.
8 out of 10 people.
Wow.
We're talking about billions of people
Do you
on every level of
define?
life in every country.
So when you say 80%, obviously at the top of the scale you have Alzheimer's and you have dementia. But when we move down the scale to the bottom, what are we talking about here? What sort of symptoms, what sort of conditions?
Well, unfortunately, way down at the bottom there are not a lot of symptoms. What you have is people who are unable to reach their human potential, or even they don't have passions, they don't have desires, they don't, they're like a blob. And that's a terrible way to be as a human being. We have everyone, humans, now the exceptions are the people who are born with a brain injury and acquire a brain injury. I talked about that in the paper. But for most people, it's that we are human beings and we have the most incredible brain of all the animals on Earth, and we should be highly functional. And many of those people are not. They can change. You can always
Mm.
change. I could see a 60-year-old listening to this, or a 70-year-old, or an 80-year-old, or a 90-year-old. Oh, it must be too late for me. No, it's not. You can change brain function very quickly. After the first day of making the changes that we're going to talk about, you will start to have a better brain. The brain, because the brain is so resilient, unlike our body, which, now you're over 40, you're over the hill, right? So you're feeling, I mean, I'm not as fast as I was. I'm still fast, I'm not as very flexible, but I'm not as flexible. My vision is not as good. You know, that's the aging body. The brain is almost separate. And these science fiction things about, you know, taking out somebody's brain and putting it in a box and having their brain still work. It's not quite true, but the concept is interesting because we almost don't need our body for the brain. We need our brain for the body, that's for sure.
So you're saying if we use the information that you've written in the paper and that someone who feels demotivated, maybe anxiety, maybe depression or any kind of mood disorders, you're saying they're kind of at the bottom of the scale of cognitive decline, cognitive issues. So you're saying if you were to correct the way that you eat, because you talk about refined carbohydrates in this paper, if we correct that, then someone can even expect to see changes in their mood, in their drive, in their vitality. And that's the least of it. That's the least of what you can expect, right?
Absolutely. Yes,
Oh,
absolutely. And you know, in the paper I sort of I started with the big picture and kind of narrowed it down. I talked about brain injuries and the resiliency of the brain and exercise and all kinds of things. You know, what affects the brain? So everything we do affects the brain. But the question is, we're not public health governments, we're not going to recommend to the population to do all these things, although they actually do that. And
mhm.
people get so overwhelmed, they say, "Oh, I don't know what to do now. This is confusing." Or they say, this conflicts with what you said 5 years ago, blah, blah. You know, there's a scientific consensus about what I've concluded in this paper, which is that the most important component in brain health for the population in general is avoiding refined carbohydrates, which include sugar. And people think, well, I eat whole grain, you know, doesn't that count? Well, most whole grain is refined flour that, you know, we're being duped by the companies. And that's so as soon as we eat that, it turns to sugar. So having a couple of pieces of toast for breakfast is like adding 6 teaspoons of sugar or whatever to your breakfast. You wouldn't normally do that, I
Okay,
hope.
so there's so much here that I want to ask then. So let's just kind of start it with the obvious question because so many people, I assume that people know what refined carbohydrates are, but the fact is they don't. And often I have to send to clients lists of foods that are refined, that are not refined. So
Yes.
let's break it down. Like, what are refined carbohydrates?
We have to even give them the 18 names used for sugar so that when
Right.
they look at the ingredient list, they spot the hidden sugar. If there's an ingredient list in what you're eating, you might not want to eat it. Refined carbohydrates, the two main foods that are considered refined carbohydrates. One is the refined flour. Most of it is wheat flour, but there's rye and there's other flour. And this flour, from when it is harvested as wheat, it's going to go through a process of refinement, manufacturing. They take out the bran, they take out the fiber, they take out basically all the nutrients, and you're left with really, you know, a nutrient or product, which is all carbohydrate. And when you consume it, like I said, as soon as you consume it, it's digested and absorbed, it becomes sugar. The other carbohydrate is sugar in all its many forms, many forms, including artificial sweeteners. They function differently, but they are still considered sugar, and they affect the brain and they affect our metabolism in ways that increases the storage of fat and impairs fat burning and makes you reliant on sugar burning, which means you're hungry for more sugar later on or almost right away sometimes.
So when you take in the refined carbohydrate or the sugar, you say that all of it gets turned into sugar eventually. So that the simplest form of sugar, which I suppose you mean glucose
It's
for,
glucose and fructose.
okay.
There's some galactose in there. The galactose is mainly from milk. That's milk
Mm.
sugar. That's not as much of a problem, but it is a problem for many people.
So when
And
what is wrong with that? So when that goes into the blood, what is wrong then? How does that then affect the brain, cause obesity? Like, what is that link there?
well, that you mentioned the interesting link. It's not obesity, it's body fat.
Body over
Uh,
fat, you mentioned. Yeah.
because a lot of
Yes.
people who are not obese are still over
Right.
fat.
Correct. Yeah.
But when you continually bombard your body with this glucose and fructose, and your body has to respond metabolically to deal with that, and it produces insulin, and you keep adding more sugar and you keep making more insulin. You then become eventually insulin resistant, which means your body is resistant, your muscles in particular are resistant against getting glucose in for energy. It complains to the brain. It says, hey, we're not getting enough glucose. Your brain says, well, the only thing we can do is make more, get the pancreas to make more insulin. And so you become hyperinsulin. Hyperinsulinemia is the term, which they don't use much anymore, but it makes you insulin resistant. And the other thing insulin does is it converts half of that sugar into fat, which goes into storage. So now you're becoming more and more over fat along the way. And when people become over fat, when you have too much body fat, we need a certain amount. If we're below that level, it's a problem. If we're above that level, it's a problem. When you have too much body fat or too little, the cells become dysfunctional. They're called sick adipose tissue is the old way they described it. But fat cells are very metabolic. And when there's too many and they become dysfunctional, they produce inflammatory chemicals throughout the body. We are now an inflamed body. And one of the many things that do, in addition to creating a condition for chronic disease, everything from heart disease, diabetes, cancers, Alzheimer's. One of the things that happens is the brain shrinks. It literally shrinks. And so if you want to know if you have a brain that needs help, just measure your body fat, because if your body fat is too high, easy to measure, we can talk about that. If your body fat is too high, you're on your way to having a brain that is shrinking and becoming more dysfunctional.
You may
And this is
really,
people are offended by this sometimes.
yeah.
Like some of them have already turned off the show, but it's reality. And if you want to be healthy, and I mentioned earlier that this priority thing, I've seen many patients, many people who say, I want to get my brain working better. I'm going to meditate. Well, if you meditate, you're still eating refined carbohydrates. The meditation is not going to work as well.
And it's not going
And
to feel,
people, meditation is great when you have a relatively healthy brain.
I
I'm going to
agree.
learn
Yeah.
Japanese because I heard if you learn a language, it helps your brain. Not if you're impaired, not if you're insulin resistant. And what
Yeah.
happens is one more thing. I'm sorry to
Yeah.
keep
No,
going
no,
on this,
go for it. Go for it.
but one more very important part of this whole mechanism of eating carbohydrates, producing too much insulin, storing fat, and so forth, is that the brain energy goes down. And one of the big problems that many people have, they don't know it, they don't speak it this way, but one of the biggest problems is their energy level in the brain is low.
You made a really good,
One of the most common complaints heard by doctors. But we have mental fatigue, brain fatigue, and we have body fatigue. They're not unrelated, but losing brain energy will certainly reduce your brain function.
when you said you don't have to be obese for this, you're right, you could be super slim. You could weigh not too much on the scale. You could be quite happy with your weight, but it's not necessarily subcutaneous fat, like fat just under the skin. It can also be visceral fat as well, right? So you could be over fat, but not
Exactly.
see it. So this could apply to anybody. Test your body fat.
Yes, or the best way to do it, the most practical and cost-free way to do it is to just get a flexible tape measure and put it around your waist at the level of the belly button in a relaxed, don't suck in your gut, just stand there relaxed and get an honest measure. And then measure your height. Don't accept what's on your driver's license because it's probably not right. People lied back then, and people shrink today. So your waist should be less than half your height. And that's
Right.
a simple, very accurate. It actually corresponds well to a DEXA scan, which is a great way to measure body fat. That's used for bones, but it also can measure body fat. And if your waist is not less than half your height, you're considered over fat.
Wow. It's that cut and dry. Actually
Dry,
use
yes.
that
Anyone,
formula.
children, adults, any race, all the things they've done in the past have been problematic for, Asians or blacks or whites or whatever. But over the years, and I've been using these things over the years, and we find, well, this isn't quite right. It doesn't compare to DEXA or these other objective measures of body fat. And now we finally have the waist to height ratio being a very well accepted, accurate representation that people can use at home. Throw out your
Mm.
scale because your scale doesn't measure body fat.
I'm becoming more and more unreliant on the scale these days because it really does just play with your head. It's not the best thing to look at. I love
It
your
was it's
formula.
part of the whole, yeah, the whole marketing, low fat trend marketing,
Mm.
uh, which is really stupid. People bought it and said, oh, okay, I'm gonna weigh myself. And whenever people say, I need to lose some weight, I said, what kind of weight? And then they get confused. What do you mean, what kind of weight? Get on the scale, it says, 155 pounds. I said, but you're measuring water. You don't want to dehydrate yourself. And then you explain about the fact that fat takes up a lot of room, but it doesn't weigh much. And they really want to lose body fat. The best way to do that is the best at-home method and clinical method is to just measure the waist and the height.
So if their waist is higher than half of their height, then there's a good chance that their brain is dealing with some sort of cognitive function issue.
It's a red flag.
It's a red flag
If
for the brain.
if you're 15 or 16 years of age, it's a red flag telling you you're headed the wrong way in life. If you're, 30, 40, 50, you've already got some cognitive dysfunction. You may not know it, you may not feel it. People say, well, I went to school and got a doctorate degree, so I must be okay. Or, they made me the CEO of this company. I must have a good brain. No, you have a
Mm.
good enough brain to do that, but how much better should it have been or could it be? And you still have time to make those changes.
And disease, actual disease, can set in like decades before these symptoms arise, right? So they say, for example, Alzheimer's or dementia, you're actually paving the way 10, 15, 20 years before you actually feel the symptoms
30
of
years
that.
before, yeah.
20 years, yeah.
Without a doubt, without a
Mm.
doubt. That's what's being ignored today in
Mm.
children, in adolescents, in young adults, is that we have all these indicators that are actually good, many of which are not practical because you're not going to go to a university laboratory and have all these expensive measurements, but you can measure your waist, and that's the easiest way to see if there is a red flag there. And if there is, the one thing, just one thing to start with, get rid of your refined carbohydrates, including sugar. After that first day of doing that, your brain's going to start being healthier.
After the first day, I really love that. I love the quick results that you're talking about. So, can we dive into sugar? Because sugar's a really big topic.
I'd rather not dive into it, but there's so
Keep
much
your
out
mouth and
there that
nose
we are
closed.
dead.
Sugar, Phil, is sugar really as addictive as cocaine? That's what people say, right?
Well, it is. The problem is that mental health practitioners say we haven't officially put the stamp on sugar as addicting yet, so we can't say it's addicting. Well, who cares if they put their rubber stamp on it? The fact is, from a behavioral standpoint, it's addicting. And if you're a person who has tried to stop eating sugar, you know what sugar addiction is like. It's
Mm.
really a serious, painful thing. In my paper, and I've I've done this over the years. I've said that sugar is the new tobacco. Scientists have started to say this in their research papers, and they're getting through the reviewers. Everybody seems, well, okay, it's true. We didn't want to say it that way, but it's a good web. And I, one of the cartoons I made, um, I don't know when, it was a year or so ago, with it was a very colorful picture of a clown holding and handing them, bending over and handing them to two children. And in the clown's other hand, behind his back, he's holding two cigarettes.
What was he holding in his
And the
first
caption, sugar is in
because you cut
two
off there.
lollipops.
On the other
Lollipops.
hand, he's
Yeah,
holding cigarettes.
two cigarettes. Yeah.
Okay.
The caption is sugar is the new tobacco. And I submitted that with the paper, kind of expecting them to say, well, it's a little too much. But at the end of the paper, I have a whole series of public health recommendations for politicians. They're the ones that make these public health recommendations. And the clown cartoon was, it was supposed to be an image of how simple the concept is. And they all liked it actually. So that got in there.
I understand the sugar addictive nature because I experience it myself. So just a bit of history about myself. I had a binge eating disorder during my 20s and it was absolutely horrific. Like horrific. Like my life was consumed by either, my day was either a good day because I wasn't eating junk, or my day was a terrible day and I was binging. So that was my life, like for years. And now I'm completely fine. Like that was a long time ago. But I understand that when I eat sugar, I will need to have sugar again shortly after, and then shortly after, and then I've got to fight to stop it again. So basically my diet is fairly good. Like I'm staying away from sugar. I have some fruit but I mainly have like, proteins and like sugar, like dairy and things like that, whole grains. But I understand that as soon as I have a cookie or as soon as I have a cake, then that will lead to another one shortly after, like maybe the day after. And I understand that now. Like I can see it as clear as day. And that is the addictive nature of sugar. So it's very small in me, but that is it. That's the addictive nature. Do you
Yeah,
get
and that
addicted? Like Phil, just come clean.
I've had a lifetime of addiction, but I've finally, there's certain levels of addiction. One of them has to do with the taste buds. You have these
Mm,
sweet buds that are just fully capable of, and they suppress the other taste buds. So when we're eating a lot of sugar, our sweet taste buds are hyperactive and our taste for bitterness, for example, is diminished. And so vegetables, which are bitter, are not liked. That's why kids don't eat vegetables because they're addicted to sugar. Their taste buds are
mm,
screaming for more sugar. And when we get off sugar, and there's different things people go through, and it's that behavioral thing. They just can't. I mean, they literally get the shakes sometimes. But
mm.
when people get off sugar, the taste buds change, and now
Yeah,
they say, well, gee, I had a little bit of something the other day and it tasted so sweet. I didn't
yeah, like a
understand why they put so,
tomato.
yeah, and it was not, well, no, it's not the product. It was that your taste buds are different now. And then there's the olfactory, the smell, which is a big, big part of taste. It's about
Mm,
80% of our taste experience is actually olfactory. And and for me, it was years of getting off the sugar, and with great difficulty many years ago, but eventually I got it. The thing that remained was the olfactory. And I remember being in Paris and walking past a bakery and smelling,
mm.
what was
Yeah,
coming out of the bakery. And it didn't cause me to go in and buy something, but it was like, oh,
there it is.
wow, I love that smell.
Yeah.
And eventually you get rid of that. I got rid of that probably 15 years ago, maybe. And so
Mm.
now it's, to me, it's all disgusting. And people, they don't make friends because they want to give me junk food. And I say, no, thanks. I don't eat any of that.
Yeah.
And they can't understand why they can't tempt me.
Yeah, yeah. What about, okay, so I know what people are thinking in their minds. Fruit, honey, really good quality maple syrup, those sorts of things. Are they off the table for you? Or is fruit okay? Is good quality honey, maple syrup, like how do they affect things?
Maple syrup doesn't fit in there because it's very processed, highly
Okay.
processed,
Okay. I've heard that
concentrated.
before. Yeah, it's not a
Yeah.
whole food, is it? It's not like it's been
No.
separated from its source.
Yeah.
But then honey is slightly different.
But honey, a low glycemic sweetener, fresh fruits, berries. So the question becomes how sensitive, how sensitive are you? How insulin
Okay.
resistant are you? And if your body fat is too high and your insulin resist, if your body fat's too high, it means you're insulin resistant. If you're insulin resistant, you're on your way to diabetes. You may or may not get there, but that's sort of the step before full-blown diabetes. But if you're insulin resistant, then you have to eliminate refined carbohydrates, period.
Right.
The question is then how much can I eat of the natural carbohydrates? Fresh fruit. Of course, fruit juice is a terrible thing because it's so concentrated. It's like eating bunch of sugar.
Yeah,
Uh,
like
but but
10
apples
oranges
and
in one go.
peaches, yeah. Can we eat these fruits? Can we eat truly whole grain products? Can we buy wheat berries from the store and grind them and make our own bread and so forth? The answer, if you're insulin resistant, is probably no. Because even when you're insulin resistant, even a natural food like an apple is going to produce too much insulin because you're already
You're
insulin
ins
resistant.
resistant. Yeah.
So the question about rice is the same thing, and lentils and all these other high carbohydrate foods. And it becomes very individual. So if you're insulin resistant, the less you have, the better. The best thing to do is to monitor your waist. I think we talked about the 2-week test on a previous show.
Yeah, we did.
You can do that. That's a good way to get started. And now you get after your 2 weeks, you get a sense of how your brain is working. People are amazed. Gee, I feel so much better. My brain is, I'm less depressed. I'm sleeping. I'm not
Mm.
hungry. I have a lot of mental energy, whatever. And now you have these symptoms and signs in some cases. And if you're going along and you're going to try something natural and you feel some brain fog, or if you start getting hungry right away, you know that it's too much for you.
So would you say that the waist and height formula, would you say if someone's waist is higher than half of their height, then that's maybe even natural sugars like honey, fruits, high carbohydrate vegetables and grains, maybe they should be wiped off the table for now.
Exactly, because
Okay.
it's not going to work.
Mm,
I wish it did. I tried it myself and it messed me up. I thought,
mm.
well, okay, now I'm going back to college. I realized that this refined stuff, this fake food I have to get rid of it completely. And I did. And then the idea was, well, okay, I can have natural stuff. I can have fruits and lentils and wild rice and for a while it worked, but I was so insulin resistant early in my life for the first 20 years of my life that it didn't work.
Mm.
And again, if you've got that red flag where your waist to height ratio is you want to do everything you can to get better, to improve your brain, to improve your body.
Yeah.
Trust me, you're not going to miss these foods. That's what people are thinking. They're shaking. You mean I can't have birthday cake? I have one like a piece every week. So there's always somebody having a birthday, right?
Yeah.
No, why would you want to do that? So, and another thing that always confused me, but when you say to people, okay, you can't have this, you can't have that, you can't have that, these things are out, and they say, well, what's left? Is there anything I can eat? There's a lot of things you can eat.
Yeah, there's a lot of things, but I'd like to know what those things are. But just quickly, just while we're on this topic, the low carb community and health conscious people like to have artificial sweeteners, like, or even things like stevia and monk
Fake
fruit
food,
extract.
fake.
I mean, what's your view on artificial sweeteners? You said they're not great either. Is that because it plays with your gut microbiome and
It affects
mm,
the gut bacteria. It affects your metabolism from the moment you taste it. There's information that goes to the brain. Your brain then responds thinking there's
mm,
sugar coming in. So do you store more fat because you're eating artificial sweeteners? Of course you are. There's no question about that.
okay.
I'm amazed that these communities would come up with ways of bypassing, what they really have to do. I remember way back in the glycemic index days, and they still talk about that. It's still a good thing. It's glucose load that's important. How much carbohydrate are you eating? That's what's important. But for a while, it was if you eat a food that's high in fiber, you're going to absorb in glucose at a slower rate.
Hmm.
And so people started putting psyllium and wheat fiber, into their junk food. Being like, I could eat it because it's got fiber. No, that
Does it
just
not
does not
help?
work. No, doesn't.
So
Does it help a
you're
tiny bit?
yeah.
Nothing significant, nothing worth trying. If you're addicted, decide you don't want to be addicted and you want to be healthy. Otherwise, like a lot of people say, you're going to die anyway. Well, might as well have fun when we're doing okay. Well, you go over there and don't be
Mm.
part of the rest of the world who really would prefer to be healthy and, contribute to humanity in some way.
So you're saying it's best to just steer clear of all of it, the artificial sweeteners, if you need to stay away from all of it.
Yeah, yeah. Our society is so sick.
Mm.
We have this is not healthy. Okay, let's try this. Oh, that's not healthy. Well, let's find some. It's like people who are smoking cigarettes and they say, "Well, I'm going to go on the pack." Wait a minute. Isn't that nicotine? Nicotine gum. I'm going to chew a lot of gum and that'll help. Does it help? Well, yeah, you're not inhaling, 800-degree smoke, but a big part of the problem is the nicotine and all these drugs that are used for weight loss. All you have to do is read the list of side effects, and if your brain is so shrunk that you can't say to yourself, "God, I don't want to take this," I don't know what to say. But it's really, really easy to be healthy and to have a great brain. It's really easy.
So how do we do that? You said there's lots of food available once you take all of that stuff away. So I know you're a fan of the low carb way of eating. I'm
I'm a
partial
fan
to
of
it
eating
too.
healthy. Yeah,
Okay,
I'm a fan of
sure.
eating healthy and finding out what your body needs because we're all a little different. And by the way, as we get older, we change. So you can't just say, well, I'm eating this way today and I'm going to eat this way for the rest of my life. No, your body changes and you have to keep up with those changes. With a good brain, you'll know what to do.
So what
But
can we
what
eat?
foods are available?
Yeah.
All the vegetables. I'm not
Mm,
including potatoes or
okay.
ketchup.
What about sweet
Like
potato?
ketchup is, again, if you're insulin resistant,
Okay.
it's not going to work.
Because it's a bit
Uh,
sweeter. Yeah.
all your meats and fish, whole real meats. I'm not talking about cold cuts that typically have sugar. A lot of the processed fish now has sugar. You have to read the ingredients. Eggs, I'm eating 6 eggs a day, typically.
Mm,
Great source of protein, great source. It's really the only source of choline in your diet. Choline
mm.
is essential for the brain in preventing Alzheimer's and other end stage conditions. Real cheeses, we're not talking about the cheese that is in
No.
a can and you shake it up and kind of, come on, real people
Yeah.
really do that. Real cheese, the fatty cheeses are better, but
Mm.
any real cheese, sour cream, butter, coconut oil.
Your views, I know what you're going to say, but when it comes to meats and fish, obviously fat isn't a problem. So if you have a steak, have the fat on the edge, have the skin on the chicken. Like fat isn't the issue here, right?
That's correct. That is not the issue. The big myth, which comes from the manufacturers, is that a lot of people cannot afford to buy healthy food. That's just a lot of garbage. When you use your brain to buy food and prepare food, you make it last. You don't throw food out. You're very serious about using it in leftovers or making soup with the whatever. There's so many ways to do it. But the fats in the meats, in the eggs in particular, are very important for the brain. Like I said, the brain, this little thing we've got in here is mostly fat. And so
Right.
we want to eat natural fats because that's where the fat comes from, the foods. If we eat unhealthy fats, processed fats, vegetable oil, seed oil, fried food, of course, if we eat those fats, they get into the brain too, and they kick out the good fats that help us function better.
So there are like not all fat is created equal. There are some fats that you need to avoid as well.
Yeah,
processed ones.
there's natural fat and fake fat. All natural
Mm,
fats are good. That doesn't mean you can eat, gobble down jars of coconut oil because
mm,
that doesn't make sense. But real, real fat, and of course the fats from fish are very important too. But unfortunately, the oceans are more polluted. And if
mm,
you're in the South, like you, local
mm.
fish does not have much EPA. So most people are better off taking a good fish oil product. That's what I do to
Okay.
assure you're getting enough EPA because that's so important for the breast, especially for children.
Okay, so you recommend supplementing, even if you are eating oily fish, you still recommend supplementing.
Yeah, it's EPA and DHA.
So that's on the label, that has to be on the label.
Yes, don't be
Mm,
don't be misled by flax oil, which has omega-3 oil, which we don't get much. Flax, that omega-3 and flax oil has to convert to EPA and DHA,
mm,
and the human body doesn't do that very well.
mm,
So if you're not getting the animal source, you might want
mm.
to reconsider.
And I believe that calories aren't an issue because when you're eating the correct diet, there is no addictive nature. So when you're eating your steak, you're done when you're done. When you've had too
Yes.
much steak. You said, oh, don't guzzle a jar of coconut oil. Well, the good news is that no one would because once you're done, you're done.
Not
There's
when
no
you're healthy.
Right, there's no addictive nature to eating the right stuff. So calories in this sense doesn't really count because you will tend to eat in a healthy brain, healthy body, you'll tend to eat what you need and then you'll
And
tend to
you'll,
stop.
yes, and you'll metabolize better. So you'll
Mm,
become a fat burning animal, unlimited energy, and not a sugar burning animal. But there's something interesting about reducing carbohydrates in the
mm,
diet. As we reduce our carbohydrates, a lot of wonderful things happen. The gut bacteria changes for the better. We become fat burners, we lose excess body fat, and so on and so forth. But one of the interesting metabolic changes is that when we reduce our carbohydrates and we're eating a moderate amount of protein and a higher amount of fat, which is how humans ate for millions of years, by the way, our metabolism changes and we become so much more efficient that the caloric need that we've had all along diminishes. Sometimes 20 to 30% less calories will get us through the day, no matter whether we're a high performing athlete or not. We're only going to require 20 to 30% less calories. I have theorized, and I promised I'm not going to write another paper, but I've theorized and thought this would be a great paper about if our caloric needs go down, do all our other nutritional needs go down? Because calories are one of the nutrients. Does our vitamin A level go down with the requirements? And there's enough research that shows that does indeed happen. Does our need for water go down? I
mm.
think it does. So in terms of calories, because you're not hungry, um, it's because your metabolism is more efficient and therefore you need less calories to be healthy.
And when you say low carbohydrate, you're not talking keto, right? Because keto is very, very low carb. Are you talking on that scale? Like this is with keto, what you're talking about,
Uh,
or even just low carb, like what kind of percentage are we talking here,
I'm
of
talking about as
carb?
low a carbohydrate intake as you need.
Right, okay.
And if you're insulin resistant, you're going to need at least a very low carbohydrate
So
intake by
keto.
definition. Well, not necessarily keto, but for many people, they will eventually learn that, well, I shouldn't be eating, I shouldn't have an apple. I'm going to have blueberries instead.
Okay, I
And
see.
over time, their carbohydrate, which they've now reduced, their carbohydrate level goes down a little more and it's now below 50 grams. And they begin making ketones, which are amazingly wonderful things for the brain. And if you want to
Um,
jump right into keto, excuse me, you can do that and you'll experience what that's like. And it can be wonderful. It's not harmful by any means.
because keto is about 50 grams of carbs or less per day, and but
Right.
a low carb is classed as 100 grams. Is that right? 100 grams or less.
Very low carb. They have these
Okay, yeah, they have these.
numbers that not everybody agrees with, but
Okay.
nobody else has come up with them. I'm trying to remember the guy who wrote the big paper years ago, and I referenced him in my paper. There's levels, but people are not going to count the carbs
Mm,
they eat, and even if they
yeah.
do, the accuracy is not there. So
So you're saying for the individual, like take your diet and just reduce the carbs from there, work from where you're at. I
yep,
think that's really
yep.
good advice. Yeah.
And find out what works best for you. If you feel good at some level and you want to uh, try going into ketosis and seeing if that makes a big difference.
I
If
love
certain
trying that, by the
things,
way. I love
yeah,
trying a bit of ketosis, even though I don't believe I need it. I love to try it. I love the discipline it requires, and then I love just seeing how it feels, and then I come out of it pretty quickly. But I love it. I love
yeah,
a bit of keep
yeah.
playing
I
with a bit
mean,
of keto.
yeah, you use your signs and symptoms wisely because they will tell you which way to go. So,
Mm,
for example, if you're hungry a lot, if you don't sleep well at night, if you wake up, in the middle of the night, which is not normal, if you get tired during the day, if you get sleepy after a meal, if you're bloated, these are all indications of carbohydrate intolerance. So if you reduce things, and a lot of things get better, then you're headed the right way, but you might have to continue reducing them to get rid of all of them. Or in the case of a certain sign like blood pressure, high blood pressure. High blood pressure is related to high insulin levels. Drop your insulin, your blood pressure comes down. And most people with hypertension, and in the 2-week test, there's some recommendations. One of which is if your blood pressure is high, especially if you're on medication, monitor your blood pressure during the 2-week test because it will come down usually. And if it comes down and now it's normal, but you're still on medication, it's too far down.
I'll
And so
put the
you have to be
link for
careful.
the 2-week test into the show notes because I think you've got it on your website. I think I remember
Yep.
that. You're the math guy. Paul Laursen is the hit guy. Where do these two come into it? This is a big question. It's my last question, but it's a big one. Go into it as much as you want or as little as you want, depending on your time. But where does exercise, math, hit? Where does all that come into this?
Well, Paul and I are very compatible in our philosophies and our approach. He works with serious athletes, and I have too. He also uses the MAF method. He has his athletes build a good aerobic base using the 180 formula and all that stuff. And I have throughout my career used high intensity training, high interval, hit training, whatever you want to call it, getting on the track and running fast. And that's part of um, the progression that I go through with athletes who want to perform better. But that's done after you've built a good aerobic system, not before. Otherwise, you get in trouble.
So, when it comes to managing insulin resistance and improving brain health, and yeah, just being your best self, would you say a mixture of math and HIIT, would you say they would help someone that would help them as they're fixing their diet to then do those things as well? That's the
Sure.
perfect
Oh, and
lifestyle.
MAF includes HIIT. MAF includes strength training
Yes,
and
yeah.
high intensity training. What I usually do is say to the athlete, what would you like to do that's high
Mm,
intensity? And some people just never want to go to a track, but they'd rather run up hills, for example. And they say, okay, we'll
mm,
do hill repeats, or they'd rather get on the road and run at 90% a race pace. Okay, that's fine. That will work. In the end, you get the same end result. So I like to do what an athlete enjoys more. But MAF is a holistic. It includes all of these healthy
right.
things.
Because my understanding is that healthy muscle is an absolute guzzler of sugar. So um, it helps you become more insulin sensitive as well, right? So if you
But
get
a
strong,
healthy muscle is an intense part of the body that burns fat, especially those aerobic muscles. They use fat for energy.
right? Okay, so strong muscles, get fit, that will help with this whole kind of issue that you've identified out there. Okay, nice.
It's really simple. It may sound
Yeah.
complicated because you're over here doing all this other stuff that manufacturers and governments have been telling us to do our whole lives. And you want to come over here, all you got to do is walk over and,
Mm.
you'll be happy.
Is there anything else that we haven't covered that you think is important for the listeners to know?
Oh, we have like several days worth of
I'm sure,
information.
right?
I mean, there's a lot of questions. You'll
Yeah.
be getting them. But when we have a really good brain, we can find the answers to things because a lot of them are just simple logic. But we need a healthy brain to do that.
So what I'll do is I'll put all of your um like all of your information into the show notes so everyone can find you if they don't already follow you already, which I'm sure they do. Anyway, it was so great to speak to you and
Great speaking
we'll
to
do this
you
again.
again. Yeah, we'll keep spreading the word. I mean, I feel so wonderful when I get a message from somebody that says, I did this and this happened, and my doctor said, "What am I doing?" And I told him, and he said, "You're crazy." And then, a couple of visits later, your doctor says, "Well, what are you doing? You look so good." And you tell him, and he says, "Well, maybe I should try that."
Thank you so much, Phil.
Thank you, Tam.